A memoir book presentation. Safeguard Our Flank. The Princess Louise Battalion by Terence Keary, 2012. This recording is dedicated to Major A.E. Keary, DCM, MID, sometime Regimental Sergeant Major of the Kensingtons. Chapter 1. Showing the Flag. Part 1. There has been, since the end of the First World War, a continuing interest in all aspects of this conflict. Of all its battles, the Somme was probably the major event. Part of that battle's order of the day was a diversion on its left flank at a place called Gommecourt. This French village and its environs held the Kern Redoubt, a fortified enclosure. This was not unusual, as all villages bisected by the German front line were fortified, for they considered such places ideal locations to fortify, using the houses as strong points with gun emplacements and machine gun nests. Their highest buildings, church towers and factories, etc., were used for observation, mapping and sniping. Gommecourt, however, was slightly different from all the others. It was the strongest. The Kern Redoubt's strength wasn't obvious to the casual observer, by having reinforced cupolas for gun head cover or numerous concrete pillboxes as World War II beach emplacements. The position contented itself with deep trenches and dugouts, underground troop positions, linking tunnels to rear areas, and very thick barbed wire entanglements. You might think that if this were true, and that the place were known to be strongly fortified, perhaps a different approach from that which Lieutenant General Snow planned might have been adopted. That it wasn't could perhaps suggest bull-headedness, incompetency, even criminal negligence. 58-year-old Snow was the eldest son of the Reverend Snow of Langdon Lodge, and after attending Eton and Cambridge he had obtained a commission in the 13th Regiment of Foot. In 1914 he received a wound at the Battle of the Marne, when his horse rolled on him. This injury he suffered from the rest of his life. A year after Gommecourt he was relieved of his post after a number of criticisms regarding his handling of the 7th Corps at both Gommecourt and Cambrai. After reading this account, you might believe he was slighted, or, of course, let off lightly. There are a whole range of books, historical and biographical, and those given to commentary, giving details and substance to participating forces, weapons used and numbers killed. Most have given me pleasure to read, adding to my store of knowledge. My father's typewritten script has formed a basis to this study, but, like most old soldiers, he didn't go into detail, and I've always been left wondering about what part he played. Nearly a century has passed, and to many the stories of that war are little known, particularly offshoots to the main battle. Coming to the subject again, I've been overwhelmed once more by what those poor men went through, and what was expected of them. And I shall do my best here not to let them down by telling a more complete story of their suffering. You might wonder how I could possibly better some offerings from the past. I can only reply that today there are more sources of information to offer a fuller picture, and I do have some personal interest. I do apologize, however, if I get a point wrong, miss out some outstanding event, or omit a leading participant. However, I make no apology for taking sides or engaging in hindsight. There have been songs sung, plays acted, and stories written about the generals and the donkeys. And when you've read this, you may write or sing your own. Blackadder has it about right, for it's difficult to imagine men being ordered to behave in such a fashion, or to accept such balderdash from their superiors. Why was it that they didn't use their common sense when presented with such daunting tasks? There is no point in attacking a trench that has barbed wire protecting it, and stupid to march forward when men to your sides are being mown down. And try as you might to find lists of men taking part in the battle, I've failed miserably. It is a pity that so many men have died without some mention, if only passing mention, of being there. Officers are mentioned by name, deeds of valour given pride of place, trenches identified with familiar titles, and many cemeteries that carry a message of the fallen. But who were the men who lived and continued to shoulder arms? And what did they do, those men who volunteered? As with all British infantry battalions, the adjutant keeps the day-to-day diary. He held the rank of captain, and was paid the princely sum of 25 shillings a day for his labours. Unfortunately, in war, the post was often left vacant, leaving the onerous job to a junior ranker, someone who wasn't so fussy in keeping the up-to-date, detailed accounts. For this recording I have chosen what happened at the Battle of the Somme and its planned diversion 10 miles to its left at Gommecourt. In particular, that part played by the Kensingtons, the guardians of its right flank, at Verdun. That was no flag-waving event, or heart-wrenching valour, but the extinction of over 50% of its men in as many minutes. After the war, my grandmother wore black for the rest of her life, alternately wearing her 4 dead sons' medals every Sunday, and that was one effect the war had. Little Hart describes Armistice Day as a commemoration, not a celebration. And Grandma had it about right, but it still led to another pointless war 20 years later. The Kensingtons, a territorial band of men, lived and worked in suburban London, and in the main they dwelt in the borough of Kensington, which lies between Notting Hill and Bayswater to its north, and Chelsea to its south. Hammersmith lies to the west, and Brompton to the east. In the first quarter of the 20th century, Kensington was noted, as it is today, for its royal gardens, its majestic palace and imperial institute. It was a place of Georgian villas and high street shops, a dormitory town for London's business class, just outside the city walls. The closer you lived to Kensington Palace and the vicarage, the higher up the social ladder you became. The Kensington Regiment was adopted by the Royal Borough in 1905, being previously the 4th Middlesex, retaining their headquarters at Iverna Gardens, close to Bayswater Railway Station. The battalion officers were men, in the main, professional, working in the city. Its men were made up of managers, self-employed craftsmen, clerks and railway workers, and in the main the ranks were all well educated for the day, attending local board and church schools. They were not exceptional thinkers, but brave as lions, motivated by the opportunity for glory. They were all kindred spirits, related to each other by school, street and expectation. Today we would call them a band of brothers. Then they would call the pals, coming from a common place and sharing common expectations. Today we would question why it was that so many men queued up to be taught how to kill, placing themselves in a position of danger. There has always been the lure of the uniform, something compelling about marching behind the band and being one of the few. Eventually, by training and association, would become an oppo, a chum, squaddy, or mate. Knowing these things, the politicians appeal to their binding power to infatuate. Kitchener points the finger, declaring, "Your country needs you." Having been given official recognition and authority, the men's chests swelled with pride. It gave each a spring in their step towards danger. As the Kensingtons marched towards the front line, they sang songs of the day, united in body. They cemented their bond and became a unit. Later, they didn't question what they were being told, for they had volunteered, and they were going to do what they were ordered to do, for they wanted to be there to fight for king and country and maintain the empire. The few sceptics who joined the throng, not wishing to be left out, sang with just as much vim and vigour along with their mates. When later they did form up on the trench parapet to march towards the enemy, they did so expecting to reach the German lines without being fired at, for they had been told no man's land would be a walkover. That it wasn't a cinch came as a big surprise. Perhaps it was self-delusion that made most believe what they were being told, or unthinking optimism perhaps, loyalty to the corps or regiment. Who really knows? This band of volunteers had their beginnings handed down from ancient feudal rights, regulated by sheriffs, shire and 100 courts. The Geld and Fyrd was a means the king and parliament used to gather together an army. This was not the only body the king relied upon, who were amateurs. County militia systems trained citizens between 16 and 65 in the use of guns, armour and horse, in case of need. The volunteers were formed in 1778, ostensibly to fight the French. It became popular for young men to enroll in the mid-19th century, bearing the expense of their equipment and uniforms, paying an annual subscription of 5 bob. This organised and conforming body of men naturally went down very well with the government, who saw it as a means whereby they could call on trained men. The local authorities could see that this would give cause and place for the active young, to keep them off the streets. As for the ladies, it is said, preferred men with a spring in their step, a military bearing, and in uniform. Whatever, it gave the men something to do, and it kept them out of the public house. Joining the volunteers became the done thing, and in particular regiments could pick and choose their recruits. The Kensingtons were one such regiment, who were filled with eager, well-motivated and keen young men just raring to have a go. 30 years before, the Lords Ranelagh and Truro agreed to dress their men in a uniform of grey, with red facings and a glazed peak shako. Black belts were buffed, trimmings of buff laces dressed, and silver appointments polished. All the height of fashion for the well-dressed military. Not long afterwards, the Boer War changed all of that. The British Army elected for khaki in the field.